The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as young Prince George walked through the ancient corridors. At 10 years old, he had already learned the weight of royal protocols and the careful dance of palace life. The sound of his polished shoes echoed against the stone walls, a rhythm that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. George paused at one of the tall windows overlooking the castle grounds. Below, he could see the red-coated guards standing at their posts, motionless as statues. He had always been fascinated by these men who stood so perfectly still, rain or shine, never seeming to tire or falter. His tutor had explained that they were the finest soldiers in the realm, chosen for their discipline and unwavering dedication. Today was different from other days. The young prince had been feeling restless during his morning lessons. Latin conjugations and mathematical equations seemed impossibly boring when the world outside beckoned with such vibrancy. His governess, Mrs. Henderson, had noticed his distraction and suggested a brief walk through the castle to clear his mind. As George wandered through the staterooms, he encountered various staff members going about their daily duties. Each person he passed would bow or curtsy, their faces respectful but distant. The formality that surrounded him sometimes felt like an invisible wall, separating him from the simple human connections he craved. The prince found himself drawn toward the main entrance hall, where he knew one of the guards would be stationed. This particular guard was someone George had observed many times before during his walks. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that seemed to hold stories of distant places and adventures. Unlike many of the other guards who seemed carved from stone, this one occasionally allowed the faintest smile to cross his lips when he thought no one was looking. George approached slowly, his curiosity overcoming the usual protocol that kept him at a respectful distance from the working guards. The man stood perfectly erect, his red coat immaculate, his tall black hat positioned precisely. The brass buttons on his uniform gleamed in the morning light, and his white gloves were spotless. For several minutes, the prince simply stood nearby, watching and thinking. He noticed small details that others might miss. The way the guard's breathing was so controlled it barely moved his chest, how his eyes remained fixed on a point in the distance, and the incredible stillness that seemed to emanate from his very being. Something stirred within George's young heart. Perhaps it was empathy, or maybe just the natural kindness that his mother had always encouraged in him. He began to wonder about the man behind the uniform. Did he have a family? Children of his own? What thoughts occupied his mind during these long hours of silent duty? The castle around them hummed with its usual morning activity. Servants moved quietly through the halls, preparing for the day's events. In the distance, George could hear the faint sounds of the kitchen staff beginning preparations for lunch. The familiar sense of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air, creating an atmosphere of dignified calm that had defined his childhood. But there was something more pressing on George's mind now. He had noticed that the guard had been standing in the same position for what seemed like hours. The morning had grown warmer, and though the man's face remained composed, George thought he detected the slightest hint of fatigue around his eyes. The young prince remembered his own discomfort during long formal ceremonies, where he was expected to stand still and maintain perfect posture. Those occasions lasted perhaps an hour at most, and even then, he found his legs growing tired and his mind wandering. How much more challenging must it be for these guards who stood for hours at a time? An idea began to form in George's mind. It was simple, perhaps even obvious, but it came from a place of genuine care. He looked around the entrance hall, noting the positions of the various staff members and the general flow of activity. Most people passed by the guard without a second glance, accepting his presence as simply part of the castle's landscape. George stepped closer to the guard, close enough now that he could see the fine details of the man's uniform and the weathered quality of his face that spoke of years of military service. The guard's eyes flickered slightly, acknowledging the prince's presence without breaking his official stance. What happened next would become one of those moments that, while small in itself, would ripple outward in ways that no one could have predicted. George, acting on pure instinct and kindness, reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief that bore his initials embroidered in blue thread. The guard's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as the young prince stepped forward and gently dabbed at the small beads of perspiration that had formed on the man's forehead. The action was so unexpected, so tender, that for a moment the carefully maintained atmosphere of formal protocol seemed to pause. George's touch was light and respectful, treating the guard not as a fixture of the palace, but as a fellow human being deserving of care and consideration. The simple gesture lasted only a few seconds, but, in those moments, something profound passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared humanity that transcended the barriers of rank and duty. The guard's composure remained perfect, but George could see a subtle change in his expression. Behind the disciplined exterior, there was surprise, gratitude, and something that might have been emotion carefully held in check. The man's eyes, which had been focused on that distant point, now briefly met the prince's gaze with unmistakable warmth. Other staff members in the vicinity had begun to notice the unusual scene. Conversations quieted, and work slowed as people tried to process what they were witnessing. A member of the royal family showing such direct, personal care for a guard was unprecedented in their experience. George stepped back, folding the handkerchief neatly, and returning it to his pocket. He smiled at the guard, not the formal, practiced smile of royal duty, but the genuine, unguarded smile of a child who had simply wanted to help someone. The guard, maintaining his position, managed the slightest nod of acknowledgement, a gesture so small it would have been invisible to anyone not watching carefully. The entrance hall had grown remarkably quiet. The usual background sounds of palace life continued, but there was a new quality to the atmosphere, as if everyone present sensed they had witnessed something significant. The moment stretched on, filled with an unusual tension and beauty. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the far end of the hall, having come to collect George for his next lesson. She paused when she saw the scene, her experienced eyes taking in the situation with quick understanding. As someone who had worked in royal households for decades, she recognized the delicate balance between protocol and human kindness that the young prince had just navigated. George remained standing near the guard for another moment, as if reluctant to break the spell of connection they had shared. The man continued his duty with perfect military bearing, but there was something different about his presence now, a subtle relaxation, perhaps, or maybe just the quiet satisfaction of having been seen and acknowledged as more than just a uniform. The morning light continued to stream through the tall windows, casting patterns on the polished floors and highlighting the ancient tapestries that decorated the walls. The castle itself seemed to hold its breath, as if recognizing that within its storied halls, another small but meaningful chapter had just been written. As George finally began to walk toward his governess, he carried with him the satisfaction of having acted on his instincts for kindness. He had crossed an invisible line that separated royal protocol from human compassion, and, in doing so, had discovered something important about both his own character and the possibilities for connection that existed even within the formal structures of palace life. The guard remained at his post, but something fundamental had shifted. The simple act of recognition and care had transformed what might have been just another routine morning into something that would be remembered and talked about in hushed tones throughout the castle for days to come. Other guards, staff members, and palace officials had witnessed the exchange, each interpreting it through their own understanding of royal tradition and human nature. Some saw it as a beautiful demonstration of the prince's character, while others wondered about the implications for established protocols and procedures. But, for George, walking away with Mrs. Henderson toward his waiting lessons, the moment had been about something much simpler than protocol or tradition. It had been about seeing someone who needed a small kindness and being in a position to provide it. The complexity of what that simple gesture might mean for everyone else was still to be discovered. The news of Prince George's gesture spread through Windsor Castle like ripples across a still pond. By lunchtime, every member of the household staff had heard some version of the story. In the servants' hall, the kitchen maids whispered excitedly about the young prince's kindness while they prepared the midday meal. The footmen discussed it in respectful tones as they polished the silver, and even the senior butler, Mr. Heartfelt, found himself reflecting on what he had been told. For the guard himself, whose name was Sergeant William Morrison, the remainder of his shift passed in a strange mixture of focus and contemplation. 23 years of military service had taught him to maintain his composure under all circumstances, but nothing in his training had prepared him for such an unexpected moment of human connection with a member of the royal family. Morrison had served in Afghanistan and Northern Ireland before joining the Queen's Guard. He had stood watch in dangerous places where alertness meant the difference between life and death. But this morning's encounter with Prince George had affected him in ways that combat never had. The simple gentleness of the boy's action had reached past all his professional defenses to touch something deep and genuine in his heart. As the afternoon wore on, other guards came to relieve their colleagues at various posts throughout the castle. Each changing of the guard carried with it hushed conversations about what had transpired. The story grew and changed slightly with each telling, but the essential truth remained constant. The young prince had shown extraordinary kindness to one of their own. Captain James Richardson, the officer in charge of the guard detail, heard the account from 3 different sources before deciding he needed to understand exactly what had happened. Richardson was a career military man who valued precision and protocol above almost everything else. The idea that established procedures might have been compromised troubled him, even if the breach had come from good intentions. He found Morrison during the afternoon shift change, pulling him aside for a private conversation in one of the castle's side corridors. The sergeant stood at attention while his commanding officer questioned him about the morning's events. Morrison's account was clear and factual. He described the prince's approach, the gentle ministration with the handkerchief, and the brief moment of eye contact that had passed between them. He was careful to emphasize that he had maintained his position throughout, and had not spoken or broken protocol in any way. Captain Richardson listened thoughtfully. His years of experience had taught him that military protocol existed for important reasons, but he also recognized genuine character when he saw it. The more he heard about Prince George's actions, the more impressed he became with the boy's natural instincts for leadership and compassion. Meanwhile, in the royal quarters, Prince George was attempting to concentrate on his afternoon geography lesson. Mrs. Henderson had said nothing about the morning's incident, but George could sense that something had changed in the atmosphere around him. The usual staff members seemed to look at him with new interest, and there were more smiles and warmer greetings than usual. His younger sister Charlotte burst into the study room during a break between lessons, her face bright with curiosity. She had heard whispers among her own governess and the nursery staff about George doing something special with a guard. Charlotte demanded to know what had happened, her 8-year-old mind fascinated by any story that involved her older brother and potential adventure. George tried to explain, but found it difficult to convey the significance of what had felt like such a natural response to seeing someone in need. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their father, the Prince of Wales. William had heard about the morning's events through the complex network of communication that kept the royal family informed about anything significant happening within their households. William sat down with his children, his expression serious, but not stern. He asked George to tell him exactly what had happened, listening carefully to his son's simple and honest account. George explained that he had noticed the guard looked warm and tired, and that helping seemed like the right thing to do. The Prince of Wales found himself in a complex position. On one hand, he was enormously proud of his son's compassion and natural leadership instincts. The gesture demonstrated exactly the kind of character he and Catherine hoped to instill in their children. On the other hand, he was aware that such actions, however well-intentioned, could create complications within the established systems that governed royal protocol. He chose his words carefully as he spoke with George about the balance between kindness and procedure. William explained that while the gesture had been beautiful and right, it was important to understand how such actions might affect others. Guards had strict rules to follow, and unexpected interactions could put them in difficult positions. George listened thoughtfully, beginning to understand that his simple act of kindness existed within a much more complex web of relationships and expectations than he had realized. This was perhaps his first real lesson in the challenges of royal life, how even the most genuine good intentions could have unintended consequences. As evening approached, Captain Richardson made a decision that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Rather than treating the morning's events as a minor protocol breach to be quietly managed, he chose to formally report the incident up the chain of command. His report was respectful and detailed, emphasizing both the prince's admirable character and Sergeant Morrison's professional handling of an unusual situation. The report reached Colonel Sir Marcus Thornbridge, who served as the senior military advisor to the royal household. Thornbridge was a man of considerable experience and wisdom, having served the royal family for over 2 decades. When he read Richardson's account, he immediately recognized the significance of what had occurred. Sir Marcus had seen many changes in royal protocol during his years of service. He had watched the monarchy evolve and adapt to modern expectations while still maintaining its essential dignity and tradition. The story of Prince George's gesture struck him as emblematic of exactly the kind of evolution the institution needed, maintaining respect for tradition while embracing genuine human connection. That evening, Sir Marcus requested a private meeting with the Prince of Wales. The two men had worked together for years and had developed a relationship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the royal family's welfare. Their conversation took place in William's private study, away from the usual formal meeting rooms. Sir Marcus presented Captain Richardson's report and shared his own thoughts about the implications of the morning's events. William listened as the experienced military advisor explained how the story was being received among the guard units. Rather than seeing it as a breach of protocol, the guards themselves viewed it as a demonstration of the royal family's genuine care for those who served them. Morale among the troops had actually improved as word of the prince's kindness spread. Sir Marcus suggested that this presented an opportunity rather than a problem. He proposed that instead of quietly managing the incident, they might consider how to build upon the positive response it had generated. The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on broader questions about the role of the monarchy in modern Britain and the importance of authentic human connection in an age of increasing formality and distance. Meanwhile, in the guards' quarters, Sergeant Morrison was experiencing his own period of reflection. His fellow guards had approached him throughout the day, some wanting details about the encounter, others simply expressing their appreciation for what it represented. Morrison had served under many different commanders and in many different circumstances, but he had never felt quite the same sense of pride in his service as he did now. The prince's gesture had reminded him why he had chosen to dedicate his career to protecting and serving the royal family. As the castle settled into its evening routines, the effects of the morning's simple act continued to ripple outward. Kitchen staff found themselves discussing what it meant to serve a family that truly cared about their welfare. Security personnel reflected on the genuine appreciation that seemed to motivate their dedication to duty. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Patricia Sullivan, gathered her staff for their usual evening briefing. The conversation naturally turned to the day's events, and Mrs. Sullivan found herself sharing stories of other moments over the years when members of the royal family had shown particular kindness to staff members. These stories, many of which the younger staff had never heard, painted a picture of a family that, despite all the formality and protocol surrounding them, genuinely cared about the people who worked to support their lives and duties. As the castle grew quiet for the night, Prince George lay in his bed thinking about the day's events and the conversations he had had with his father. He was beginning to understand that being a prince meant more than just following rules and attending ceremonies. It meant finding ways to use his position to make positive differences in the lives of others, even in small ways. The guard who had been the recipient of his kindness was also awake, standing at his night post, and reflecting on how a simple gesture from a 10-year-old boy had reminded him of the honor and purpose in his chosen profession. Neither of them could have predicted how significantly this quiet evening was setting the stage for changes that would affect not just them, but the entire culture of service and protocol within the royal household. The following morning brought an unusual energy to Windsor Castle. Colonel Sir Marcus Thornbridge had spent much of the night crafting a proposal that he believed could transform a simple act of kindness into something much more significant. His years of experience had taught him to recognize moments when genuine change was possible, and he sensed that Prince George's gesture had created exactly such an opportunity. Sir Marcus arrived early at his office, reviewing the documents he had prepared and considering the best approach for the crucial meeting scheduled with the Prince of Wales. His proposal was ambitious but thoughtful, designed to honor the spirit of what Prince George had done while establishing new protocols that could enhance the relationship between the royal family and those who served them. At the same time, Prince George was beginning his morning lessons with a new awareness of the complexity surrounding his actions. His conversation with his father had opened his eyes to the intricate balance between personal kindness and royal responsibility. Yet rather than discouraging him, this understanding seemed to deepen his thoughtfulness about how to use his position constructively. Mrs. Henderson noticed the change in her young charge immediately. During their morning mathematics lesson, George asked questions that went beyond the curriculum. He wanted to understand how decisions made by people in authority affected those who worked for them. His natural curiosity was now focused on questions of leadership and responsibility that were far beyond his years. Meanwhile, Sergeant Morrison reported for his morning duty with a sense of anticipation he couldn't quite explain. Word had reached the guards that there might be changes coming to their protocols, though no one knew exactly what to expect. The story of the previous day's encounter with Prince George had continued to spread, reaching guards at other royal residences and generating discussions about the nature of their service. Captain Richardson briefed his morning shift with particular attention to maintaining the highest standards of professionalism. He sensed that all eyes would be on the guard units in the coming days, and he wanted to ensure that they demonstrated the excellence that had earned them their positions. The crucial meeting between Sir Marcus and the Prince of Wales took place in the Colonel's office, surrounded by portraits of previous monarchs and military leaders. Sir Marcus presented his proposal with the systematic precision that had served him well throughout his military career. His plan was elegantly simple, yet revolutionary in its implications. Rather than treating Prince George's gesture as an isolated incident, Sir Marcus proposed establishing new protocols that would formally recognize the human needs of those serving in ceremonial positions. This included scheduled relief periods, designated areas for brief personal interactions with royal family members, and enhanced support services for guards during long ceremonial duties. William listened intently as Sir Marcus explained how these changes could strengthen rather than weaken the traditions they were meant to protect. By acknowledging the humanity of those who served, the royal family would demonstrate the genuine care and respect that should be the foundation of such service. The proposal also included provisions for Prince George to play a continuing role in implementing these changes. Sir Marcus believed that the young prince's natural instincts for kindness could be channeled into meaningful leadership opportunities that would benefit both his own development and the welfare of castle staff. As the two men discussed the details, it became clear that they were talking about something much larger than protocol adjustments. They were considering how the monarchy itself could evolve to better reflect contemporary values while maintaining its essential dignity and purpose. Prince George, unaware of these high-level discussions, was making his own quiet observations during his morning walk through the castle. He noticed details he had missed before: the way staff members moved through their duties, the expressions on their faces, the small signs of fatigue or satisfaction that revealed their human experiences beneath their professional roles. When he encountered guards during his walk, George found himself wanting to acknowledge them in some way, but uncertain about the appropriate approach after his father's gentle warnings about protocol. The tension between his natural kindness and the constraints of his position created a thoughtful intensity in the young prince that impressed everyone who observed him. The breakthrough came when Sir Marcus and William concluded their meeting with a decision to proceed with a modified version of the Colonel's proposal. They agreed to implement changes gradually, beginning with enhanced support services and leading toward more formal recognition of the personal needs of those in ceremonial positions. Most importantly, they decided to involve Prince George directly in these changes, creating opportunities for him to interact with guards and other staff members in structured ways that would satisfy both his desire to help and the requirements of royal protocol. The first implementation of these new protocols took place that very afternoon. Prince George, accompanied by Sir Marcus and his father, visited the guards' quarters for what was described as an informal inspection and appreciation visit. The guards, who had been informed of the visit but not its full purpose, stood in perfect formation as the royal party entered their quarters. But instead of the usual formal inspection, something entirely different unfolded. Prince George, speaking words that had been carefully prepared but delivered with genuine feeling, thanked the guards for their service and acknowledged the demands of their duties. He spoke about his growing understanding of the sacrifices they made and his desire to ensure they felt valued and supported. But the most powerful moment came when the prince approached Sergeant Morrison specifically. With his father and Sir Marcus looking on, George once again offered a simple gesture of care, this time a formal handshake and a few words of personal gratitude. Morrison, prepared for this moment but still moved by its significance, responded with military precision but also with evident emotion. The exchange lasted only seconds, but everyone present understood they were witnessing the establishment of a new tradition. The other guards watched with pride and amazement as their colleague received personal recognition from the young prince. The formality of their positions remained intact, but now it was enhanced by genuine acknowledgement of their humanity and service. As word of the visit spread throughout the castle, staff members at every level felt the impact of what was occurring. The changes being implemented would affect not just the guards, but everyone who worked to support the royal household. Mrs. Sullivan gathered her housekeeping staff to explain the new protocols that would provide better support during long ceremonial events. Kitchen workers learned about enhanced break schedules during busy periods. Security personnel were informed about new procedures that would better accommodate their personal needs while maintaining operational efficiency. The response from staff was overwhelmingly positive. Many had served the royal family for years, dedicating themselves to maintaining the standards and traditions expected of them. To have their efforts acknowledged and their well-being considered felt like a validation of everything they had worked to achieve. Prince George spent the evening with his family, discussing the day's events and the broader implications of the changes being implemented. His siblings Charlotte and Louis listened with fascination as their older brother described his new understanding of leadership and service. The conversation reinforced lessons that William and Catherine had been trying to teach their children about using privilege responsibly and finding ways to make positive differences in the world around them. George's spontaneous act of kindness had become a catalyst for exactly the kind of meaningful change they hoped to see their children champion throughout their lives. As the castle settled into its evening routines, there was a palpable sense that something important had shifted. The ancient walls had witnessed many changes over the centuries, but perhaps few as meaningful as this quiet evolution toward greater humanity and connection. Sergeant Morrison, standing at his evening post, reflected on the remarkable journey from the previous morning's unexpected gesture to this afternoon's formal recognition. His years of military service had taught him the value of tradition and discipline, but today had shown him that these values could be enhanced rather than compromised by genuine human connection. The other guards, too, carried themselves with a new sense of pride and purpose. They understood that their service was now formally recognized not just as a duty, but as a contribution to something larger and more meaningful than ceremonial tradition alone. Prince George, as he prepared for sleep, thought about the day's lessons in leadership and responsibility. He was beginning to understand that his position as a future king would require him to balance many complex considerations, but that the foundation of effective leadership would always be genuine care for those he would serve. The changes implemented that day would continue to evolve and expand, affecting not just Windsor Castle, but other royal residences as well. What had begun as a simple gesture of kindness from a 10-year-old boy had become the catalyst for a broader transformation in how the royal household approached its relationships with those who served it. Years later, when historians would write about this period in the monarchy's evolution, they would note how Prince George's spontaneous act of compassion had helped bridge the gap between ancient tradition and modern humanity. They would describe it as an example of how the most profound changes often begin with the simplest gestures, performed with genuine care and recognized with wisdom. But for those who lived through these events, the most important aspect was not their historical significance, but their immediate human impact. A young prince had seen someone who needed kindness and had responded naturally. A military leader had recognized an opportunity for positive change and had acted on it. A royal household had found a way to honor both tradition and humanity. The guard who had received that first gentle touch of a handkerchief to his brow would carry the memory of that moment throughout his remaining years of service. It would remind him, during the longest and most challenging duties, that his service was seen, valued, and appreciated by those he had sworn to protect. And Prince George would carry forward the lesson that true leadership begins with seeing the humanity in others and finding ways to honor and support it, regardless of the protocols and traditions that might seem to stand in the way. The silence that had fallen over the palace after his initial gesture had been broken by something far more valuable: the sound of positive change taking root and beginning to grow.